Principles which we fought for. If we look back the history of our struggle and see where they originated, we can see clearly that they originated in the Freedom Charter, but are now being carried on by people who may consciously or not consciously be aware that they are taking those ideas from the Freedom Charter.
The Freedom Charter is such an inspirational document that, truly speaking, in the history of humanity, it stands side by side with the Magna Carta.
I find it the richest document the ANC has ever produced, purely by virtue of the fact that it is the wishes of the people. You cannot go beyond the wishes of the people.
It is a living document, which is the vision of the movement. It remains the vision of the movement as a whole.
People use the Charter to hold the ANC into account, to remind the ANC of its historic promises, but to also take us back to what the struggle against apartheid was essentially about.
In my grandmother's home, we often had lots of comrades passing by. That's when I kind of heard this about this thing called the Freedom Charter, and that kind of became the refrain, how we were going to reclaim our country and how it was going to be the kind of, socialist utopia.
Our forebears proclaimed in unison that, and I quote, "We, the people of South Africa, declare for all our country and the world to know that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white, and that no government can justly claim authority unless it is based on the will of all the people."
I believe in any South African who seriously loves this country and is involved and thinks of it. The Freedom Charter is part of his red corpuscles.
The African National Congress, ANC, was the leading liberation organization in the struggle against apartheid. It was formed in 1912, mainly by the disenfranchised black middle class who increasingly suffered the indignity of land disposition and their power and wealth opportunities undermined and attacked by the colonial government. For decades, their moral appeals to the ruling class against their oppression were met with indifference and worsened conditions. This came to a head in 1948 when the white Afrikaner nationalists were elected into power. The right-wing Nationalist Party immediately set about institutionalizing and entrenching the system of racial capitalism and discrimination. This system became known as Apartheid. They introduced various oppressive measures of control and denial of rights over those who were not classified as white. The South African population was then classified into a hierarchy of privilege consisting of 4 racial categories, with whites at the top and the African majority at the bottom, and suffering the worst oppressive controls and abuses.
When the Nats took over after 1945, 48 was their first election and they won through. The move of the regime became more and more tough, and became clear on the cards that the Communist Party was going to be outlawed. So they started the Congress movement. The whites worked among the white community to influence them because the whites, many of them were better than we were, according to the law.
The decision to establish and run the Congress of Democrats was mainly strategic. There were places we couldn't go and things we couldn't do. And it enabled us to contribute as the support groups to identify with the Congress movement as it became.
The coloureds had to be brought up to the point to make them realise they stand together and oppose the regime. The Indians were the same way, and we all worked under the banner of the African National Congress.
In 1952, the ANC launched the Defiance Campaign of protest and deliberately defying the new apartheid laws en masse.
The ANC became a mass movement with the Defiance Campaign. And the Defiance Campaign was a huge success. It was a huge mobilization. No one could have predicted that 8,000 people would go to jail voluntarily. And no one would have thought that the ANC, which was cloaked in respectability, Professor Matthews or Chief Latuli, these were people of dignity. No one could think that they would lead a prison campaign, stand up in public and say, I'm going to defy the law. So there was a sea change in the leadership, in their commitment, and this led to a sea change among the masses. In that process, a mass movement emerged.
The new measures by the apartheid regime radicalized the ANC and activated them into a mass resistance that increasingly drew in black working class people and the Communist Party as its ally.
I came home every day at a certain time from work. But on a Tuesday and a Thursday, I went to meetings to learn how to become really radical. Not using guns, using the brains, talking to people, making them realize how to bring about the change with this vicious system.
I became a full-time cadre of the Congress of the People. I was an organizer. And I worked with Green and Gojana, and the two of us were organizers, and we used to go to Langa and Stellenbosch and Worcester and Paar, all over the place, to the townships, to hold public meetings. So it was very hazardous. The police were after us all the time. The special branch were very active, and we were always scared because we knew what was coming, and it came. It was knife-edge stuff.
The apartheid regime's brutal repression of the Defiance Campaign led to the Congress Alliance calling for the convening of the Congress of the People.
In Cape Town, Brian Bunting, Governor Mbeki ran the propaganda campaign, organized the leaflets.
A call to the people was produced, a beautiful document, and we went to all the townships and we had public meetings, and at all these meetings we called for demands.
All the people who were Congressites then went out to the various people and areas and met people in the street and organizations finding out what would you like to have done in your country one day.
What do you want? What do you want out of a new society? What do you want in a new South Africa?
And they went throughout the whole country, of course. And everybody, as far as and wide as they could, everybody they met to say their piece as to what they wanted. And they wrote it on cardboard and bits of paper and toilet paper.
We want a tarred road. We want streetlights. We want a lavatory. We want the boss, not to talk to us like the way he talks to us at the factory. It wasn't as if the basis, the background of the demands was everybody was thinking of tremendously high politics. Yes, of course there were people like that. That was the whole basis behind organising the campaign. But the people who were actually involved was the guy who's emptying the rubbish bin there now. To the best of my knowledge, amongst the white community, complete and total indifference, if anything, no worse, active hostility. Let's be honest about it. And while I certainly wasn't part of the drafting of the Freedom Charter, I absolutely do believe the people who told me that they sat around in a room with these heaps and heaps of paper and tried to cull them into sense. To me, the Freedom Charter is poetry.
And then, of course, came the Congress itself, where there were 3,000 participants, with another 10,000 or so standing outside the venue.
We got together and decided we wanted to go to Kliptown.
60 years ago, 3,000 men and women from all walks of life, from towns, villages, and the rural hinterland, young and old, rich and poor, workers, peasants, and intellectuals descended on this place, Kliptown, where we are gathered today. The delegates to that august occasion, the Congress of the People, longed for a country and continent where all shall live as equal, with equal opportunities, friendship, and brotherhood. These patriots, defying all odds, including harassment, intimidation, detention, and beatings, gathered here driven by nothing else but their love for their country and the quest for freedom.
Many more people than us tried to get from Cape Town to Kliptown, but they didn't make it.
Alex was on his way with a few others and by lorry to Kliptown. In Beaufort West, they were arrested. And that is where they spent their days of the conference that was held in Kliptown and never reached it.
I was a safe, secure white. I was a university student and I was protected as a university student. That must be distinguished very, very thoroughly from what it was like from the 60s onwards. It was frightening sometimes, stressing sometimes, but it was almost a game parking your car a long way away so that you could walk to a place because you knew the special branch were going to take numbers. Yes, we knew ANC people, and we knew that they were having a bitter time.
There are 3,000 people sitting on planks, on bricks, on a hill. And on the side, these ladies from the Indian Congress set up 2 tables, and they had big signs, soup with meat and soup without meat, because they were vegetarians. And we used to joke during the treason trial about, are we getting soup with meat or soup without meat? You know, there was a hell of an atmosphere. Partly because it was a unique gathering. It was the biggest public meeting we had ever had in South Africa, on a racial basis. It was largely African, but there were quite a lot of whites and Indians and coloureds there, quite a lot.
There was a platform in front. The platform was actually quite high. The chair changed from section to section of the Freedom Charter, and then speakers would come forward from the floor of the Congress, of the people, to speak to the clauses of the Freedom Charter.
I had the economic clause, and I remember Sonia Bunting spoke about peace.
I don't recall any of the well-known names being there, although I think there were messages from them. We were very conscious of banning orders. They were hurtful, they made us angry. They made me angry. But in a funny sort of a way, naively, I regarded them as a kind of accolade. You are worth banning.
So what they did is they got a flat not far away, and they sat in this flat and looked through the window at the meeting, because they were very jealous of our wonderful meeting, you see. So none of them could attend.
We were standing in a small group, me, Tony Armstrong, Benny Sachs, and probably Yusuf Wadi would have been there, and probably Alf Wannenberg. And the message came from the platform, we need to have somebody who's going to introduce the doors of learning and culture shall be opened. Benny was our leader, he was our unofficial leader. And he said, right, we've got to produce a speaker. You've never spoken at a public meeting before, Mervyn, you do it. And I was absolutely startled. And I found a piece of paper, and I remember folding it into quarters, and I wrote some notes on it. And I went onto the platform with my little bit of paper. And I must confess that I remember what I said to this day. I've never told anybody else about it, and I would very much prefer it to be forgotten. It was so inappropriate and it was such rubbish.
Whenever they adopted the clause of the Freedom Charter, every time they'll say, Maibuye, all power, aluta.
What created a lot of tension was the police, because there was a posse of police on horseback outside the fence, and they just rode around, instead of being visible. And there were all sorts of police standing there with guns, and there were armoured police vehicles. And they were, of course, taking notes of all the speeches, because we were speaking from the platform, which they'll use later on in the treason trial. A posse of police came walking in. And in those days, the police used Sten guns. And a Sten gun has a barrel, and they were clicking the barrel and went tick, 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 tick. And as they came walking in, they were doing this, you see, and we could hear something was going on.
And I found myself sitting next to a man, and he said to me, "You're frightened, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Give me your hands." And he said, "I'm used to the police. This has happened to me before. I'm not frightened." And he took my hand and said, "But you're not frightened." I wasn't. That was the spirit in the Congress of the People.
These are men and women who dared to dream. They dreamt of a country free of oppression. They dreamt of a country free of economic exploitation. They also dreamt of a country that is prosperous and at peace with itself and the world.
The whole audience rose, and I thought they were going to rush the police. It was so close. They were so angry, because this meeting was something very special.
Where are all your kids? Are they home? Are they watching you do this? Are they watching you fight against us?
People were angry. People were hurt. I think that while on the one hand it was inevitable and it was necessary tactically from their point of view that the regime had to break it up and get involved like that, by God, it didn't do them any good.
And everybody knew it was a piece of history, and the police were disrupting it. And somebody started singing Unzima Lomthwalo, the burden is heavy. And then slowly the audience began to sing Unzima Lomthwalo, and it calmed down, and then people sat down. So a very dangerous, because the police were ready to open fire. And if they'd opened fire, it would have been from outside as well as from inside. They walked in and got up on the platform where the speakers were sitting, And they said to the chairman, this meeting is closed. So he said, okay, can I close the meeting? They said, okay. So he got up and he said, the police are asking me to close the meeting. So I want to ask you, do you approve of the Freedom Charter? And we all said, yes, we adopted the Charter. He said, the Charter is adopted and the meeting is closed. So they closed the gate and they set up tables at the gate and every delegate was searched, name and address taken, place of work and so on. And of course the police followed up and nearly everybody was fired, those who had jobs. And then came the treason trial. So 156 of us were arrested.
The treason trial came as a result of the Cape Town conference, because they realized what was really on. We were making a move to overthrow the government, a very strong move. So then they had this treason trial, which lasted for 4 years, but it was squashed after 4 years. It was squashed because the evidence wasn't there.
The Africanists within the ANC felt that the Freedom Charter was a betrayal of the liberation struggle. They were opposed to the Congress Alliance organizing along racial lines imposed by the Apartheid system. They were also opposed to the clause in the Charter that stated, South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. The Africanists eventually broke away from the ANC and formed their own party, the Pan-Africanist Congress, the PAC, on 6 April 1959. With the banning of the black liberation organizations after the Sharpeville massacre on 21 March 1960, the mass movement suffered a lull. It was only to be revived during the 1970s by the wave of black worker strikes in 1973 and the Soweto student uprising of 1976. The ANC's influence in the revival of the mass movement was limited at the time, but grew stronger in the 1980s. Despite repression, mass struggle against apartheid reached its highest point in 1985 after the formation of the United Democratic Front and the Congress of South African Trade Union, Cosatu. During 1987, at the height of the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, Cosatu held its second National Congress, and by then, the ANC and the mass democratic movement reached high levels of popularity.
There is no basis at all for any cooperation between organized labor and so-called liberal bourgeoisie elements in our country. Our survival in the light of vicious repression on all fronts against the undemocratic forces leased against us has placed us in a very central political position. We have seen that there is a growing conflict with employers as economic conditions deteriorate.
It's a period of transition, comrade, because we know we cannot move from capitalism to socialism within a night, comrade.
A debate was initiated around Cosatu's political policy, central to which was whether to adopt the Freedom Charter or not. This debate pitted two dominant political tendencies within Cosatu: the Workerists, led by the National Union of Metalworkers of South Africa, NUMSA, and the Charterists or Populists, led by the National Union of Mineworkers, NUM.
We have certain principles that we as Cosatu have agreed to. But most importantly, comrade, and I think we are all forgetting that, there is worker control.
The Freedom Charter is the program, a political program for the national democratic struggle.
The debate split in half one of Cosatu's most militant unions, the Commercial Catering and Allied Workers Union of South Africa, CAUSA.
It is no good for us to adopt the Freedom Charter, only to be able to stand on a soapbox on a street corner and say, I adopted the Charter.
The Workerists had socialist leanings and were wary of the liberation movement and the ANC, which was still banned and in exile. Cosatu needed to have a close alliance with the ANC in the struggle against apartheid.
It is quite a sensitive subject we are dealing with now.
because it's determining the future of this federation.
The Cosatu 1987 debate around the Freedom Charter was not about serious differences about the content of the Charter, but whether to ally Cosatu closely with the ANC or not.
We say we are a federation that is controlled by workers.
It is for this reason that the majority of workers in Cosatu have adopted the Freedom Charter.
Through thorough discussion and negotiations and compromises, common solutions can actually be found. Yes, it's a challenge, but I wouldn't call it a crisis because we do have ways and means of discussing the matter.
Do we still have a crisis in education? Definitely.
There's a big crisis. In fact, it's a catastrophe.
There's vast inequality in the country, right? In the spaces where the working class community lives, those people are getting poorer, but the education system is also getting poorer in those areas. Not enough resources are being able to reach those areas, whether it's a textbook, a desk, a window for a school. And then when you look at middle class schools, or when you go into the southern suburbs of Cape Town, for example, there's vast differences in the way learners are able to engage with curriculum and the schooling system in general.
Probably have a maid in the house, have access to the latest gadgets. Those learners are even able to teach their teachers before they can actually be taught how to operate things like computers in computer literacy classes.
We have a two-tier basic education system. There's one for the rich, and then the one for the masses and the working class. And I think for me that is meant to produce a layer of those who are going to work for the rich as laborers.
The overwhelming majority of black kids are trapped in a dysfunctional, poor education system that was reserved to reproduce the cheap labor system in the Pakistans and in the townships. In that world, 50% of the kids do not arrive at grade 12 in the prescribed 12 years. There is a massive dropout rate, which nobody have done a proper research to find out exactly why, and more so why so many drop out at grade 10 and 11.
The government has not done enough to make sure that children all across the country have schools that are able to teach them and help them become better serving citizens in the economy.
We are said to be one of the biggest spenders on education in the world, certainly in middle-income countries. But we have the worst record in maths and science. We have a huge dropout rate. And all that is symptomatic of a poor functioning education system.
There are issues like, lack of transport, uniform. Children who don't have access to food as their parents are unemployed.
The number of children in school is now comparable with almost anywhere in the world. But the education is poor, the teachers are poor, and the quality of the equipment is hopeless.
The schools are there, but they don't achieve anything real because it's difficult to learn and teach in these spaces.
There are a lot of kids that work at a slower pace, and the fact that we have such big numbers, we're not able to do more the way we'd like to if we had a smaller group.
And half of the time it is not in the home language, which makes it hard. So we teach at a slower pace than what a more privileged school would be able to. The schools here are not equipped. We just given the basic things, and we use our money that comes out of our pockets half of the time.
Recently, we went on a learning visit to the Eastern Cape, and we visited 60 schools, and we found that just about 46 of the 60 schools that we visited had at least one building made of inappropriate structure. And when you say at least one, this is like at most minimum. So typically schools are still made of mud structures or just plain of wood or just of asbestos.
So you see, the figures can be manipulated to show success. On the one hand, the numbers are going to school. On the other hand, when you look at the facilities and the administration, it's pretty awful.
There's so many strikes that are going around the country, even at basic education level, where recently we had students in Alice block out a road in the Eastern Cape and protest because they didn't have sufficient classrooms, and it had been a problem for a while. You've got schools in the more urban areas of the country, in Cape Town and Johannesburg, typically on the streets, saying to government, enough is enough. These are young learners, you know. They haven't probably even rationalized to themselves the power of using your body as a political instrument. But they've been pushed to those levels because the education system is in dismay. It truly is in crisis. And the ANC has not done enough.
Education constitutes the center for development in South Africa and in Africa. The sustainability of political freedom and the economic freedom depends on the education.
The principles which we fought for in 1976, if we look back the history of our struggle and see where they originated, we can see clearly that they originated in the Freedom Charter, because the Freedom Charter rejects the Bantustans. It talks about freedom of education, where it originated in the Freedom Charter, but are now being carried on by people who may consciously or not consciously be aware that they are taking those ideas from the Freedom Charter.
Forward with 0% forward!
The most reactionary institutions in South Africa, like universities, are beginning to listen.
We demand that UCT call an emergency council meeting to discuss the immediate suspension of the fee increase of 10.8%.
Fees must fall. We've betrayed them. Basically, they looked up to us. All we have done is just allowed the whites to continue with their privilege, and what you're asking us to do is, let's just accept it. And our parents are no different from when they were liberated, or whatever you call it. Therefore, let's change the terminology. We'll decolonize the country, and we'll start with you and decolonize you. So I thought, wow.
I think the phrase decolonizing the university is a very important phrase. I think we've got to decolonize society in the sense of allow it to escape from the shackles of a very horrible past.
Those kids who demand free education, they are demanding the implementation of the Freedom Charter. Those who say, let's share in the wealth of the country, they are demanding the implementation of the Freedom Charter.
The struggle continues. The struggle of the black child continues, but now it has taken a financial form. And when we continue to get financially excluded, that then becomes the way in which we are inhibited and we are marginalized from achieving the full potential of this country.
We now have to buy education. If you don't have money, you're coming from a working class and poor background, you are most likely not to be able, after you've exited high school, to enter institutions of higher learning.
The majority of our people are poor. If you look at the dynamics of society, where you have almost 50% of the working people living on less than 10 rand a day, how do you then expect them to have exorbitant amounts of 5,000 to 10,000 registration at the end of the year? and tuition and residence and accommodation and catering and food costs, then it will amount to almost 60 to 70,000 annually. It's impossible.
And I think what we've experienced this year is the equivalent of 1976 to our current government.
He wants to be able to say in the media that there was a small group of hooligans that needed to be arrested. So we must show that there are hundreds of hooligans.
It's a challenge from below to say this is not the way we want to live.
You say people shall govern and they should be represented in all race and everything else, but we also know that there hasn't been much information in terms of academic staffing. You go to the statutory committees of these institutions, most of them, it's white males that are sitting there and dominating them. There's no gender diversity. Even though we would speak of Equity Act and everything else, we still haven't seen transformation in that. Roads must fall. Where basically students were saying, let us decolonize education. Starting the statues, but also not just the statues themselves, but what they represented.
This charter here talks about access to education. This is what the youth are fighting for, that you did promise that we will access education, so now we want delivery. Education is not a privilege, it is a right.
Education is a service to Africa. We are tired of education being seen as a commodity, and we would like education to rather be seen as a service that it should be.
Higher education is important for their future. They're not doing anybody a favor by studying.
I feel that we have been mandated to come and get our qualifications so that we can go back to our communities and give back to those children and make sure that they also come back here in the higher learning institutions and achieve what they want to become.
We can resume the academic program and make sure that we write a
I cannot come to any other conclusion but that we are dealing here not with a spontaneous outburst, but with a deliberate attempt to bring about polarization between whites and blacks.
In fact, often those who are calling for free higher education for their ulterior motives, their ulterior motives is actually to destabilize government, and to mislead students for their own narrow political agendas.
This government will not be intimidated, and instructions have been given to maintain law and order at all costs. Those educational institutions at which blacks are destroying their own amenities will be closed for an indefinite period.
If you say free education for all, there must be an ulterior motive. Why should I be paid for by government?
People have the idea that the government will now hesitate to act. They are making a mistake.
Indeed, the malaise lies at the heart of the universities and at the heart of government, a snail pace changing of society through the lens of universities and producing new intellectuals and new skills. And all students are seemingly now agreeing.
The defining factor of Fees Must Fall is that it has not been something that has been specific to any political organization. It has been a movement that has been owned and driven entirely by students.
There can never be a real empowerment in any country until you address the question of education.
Free education, Bambi! Universities will buy Bambi! Now 40 cleaner! Now 70 cleaner! Bambi!
Since the 19th century, South Africa has had a highly monopolized racial system of industrial capitalism, with ownership and control of the economy dominated by what is referred to as white monopoly capital. Made up of big South African capitalists and foreign investors, the colonial rulers and later the apartheid government designed the system to perpetuate cheap black labor needed by mining and agricultural companies. During the early years of the Mandela presidency, the ANC government favored economic policies that promised to address apartheid's legacy of huge inequality and widespread poverty. This included measures such as nationalization of the commanding heights of the economy, in line with the Freedom Charter.
Influential circles amongst whites in the country and abroad are agitated about our demand for nationalization, not of the entire economy, but of certain sectors which we regard as being important insofar as the economy of the country. Nationalization is part of the history of this country.
Pre-1994, sharing in the country's wealth, it represented a promise, something that we were all working towards. Even though we were young, it's something that we thought, okay, when the new government comes, we are going to really share, not just people voting, but actually sharing the wealth, the resources.
The mineral wealth beneath the soil, the monopoly banks shall be transferred to the ownership of the people as a whole. Big industrial corporations shall be managed for the benefit of the people as a whole. That's the core of the working class issues.
When we speak about the people and we're restoring the wealth of the people, we're talking about the redistribution of wealth to the majority, people who simply do not make enough to eke out a living.
What we want to achieve is a healthy and vibrant economy which can ensure full employment to our people, maximum production, and the development of social justice. We wanted to rectify the imbalances that exist in our economy.
But this soon changed in 1996, with the government adopting the neoliberal growth, employment and redistribution, or GEAR policy.
We saw GEAR and what it did and the promises that GEAR made. Most of us were actually convinced that it's not going to do what it promised to do.
We have a problem with the neoliberal economic framework, which is largely about undermining any form of social welfare.
There are no pro-poor policies, and we have stuck with neoliberalism and we have embraced it as a country.
Neoliberal economic policies are measures implemented by the governments and capitalists to shift the burden of economic crises onto the backs of poor and middle-class people. They include cuts in social spending, privatization of public goods and services, increases in the price of education, water, electricity, public transport, and so on.
Before 1994, there were enormous pressures on the leadership of the ANC to make big concessions on the economy. On politics, the regime was willing to agree that there has to be some transfer of power. And in all the discussions in exile with Thabo Mbeki and others, the economy was put aside. But nevertheless, we went ahead and we drew up the Reconstruction and Development Program, the RDP. But behind the scenes, the IMF and World Bank and Bretton Woods institutions were putting enormous pressure on Thabo Mbeki and on the government to modify that because it was too progressive for them. And so in 1996, GEAR came into existence. And GEAR was a very, very nasty program. A degree of austerity was introduced, which meant cutting back on the state, cutting back on spending. That set the scene. We have been following a policy of fiscal prudence all along, even now. This is what led to lack of fulfillment and achievement in many of the clauses of the Charter.
What we have seen post-94, instead of like the kind of redistribution that the Freedom Charter, more modest measure, our Constitution envisioned, is not what has happened.
Sharing of the wealth in the country means workers being paid decent wages. With the mine workers, this sharing of the wealth is really just something that's on paper. There hasn't been anything that has significantly changed since 1994. Have they seen that wealth? Has that wealth been redistributed? Are they sharing it in any way? And the answer for them is no, and their lived experiences spell out the no. For women, it's not a reflection of an industry or wealth that is being equally shared. The fact that in mining, wages until 2012 had not risen substantially for a very long time. And for them, even after 2012, yes, there's been changes in terms of what people are taking home, but it's not a massive change when you think about how much wealth these people are producing in a way.
You've got these workers who are largely black who are extracting this wealth, and their economic position has not changed. And they extract this wealth and it gets shipped off, overseas.
In the shop floor, companies adopted a very robust neoliberal agenda of restructuring plans. The implications for that has been we were confronted by massive job losses. And we posed the question in the middle of that listen, we see that this thing is happening. Yes, you're not compromising volume, but you continue to shade jobs. The fundamental question for us was, if you increase these volumes but you destroy buying power because you retrench workers on a continuous basis, who's to buy the very same product that you are actually producing? That is why when this crisis hit us, which was a financial crisis, it was very simple for us to define it as a capitalist crisis.
Historically, it is the black middle-class layer of clergymen, lawyers, tribal chiefs, teachers and peasants that form the social base of the ANC as the political party and representative of its interests. In a context of a highly monopolized economy controlled by white monopoly capital, there is very little scope for new black entrepreneurs to grow and become big capitalists in the new South Africa. State power and control over the state is the central means for wealth accumulation by the previously oppressed black middle class. Having been denied by racial oppression for over 100 years, this black middle class layer has a voracious appetite for wealth and capital accumulation. Its impatience has pushed it to a state of wealth accumulation by any means necessary.
Despite major redistributive efforts since the democratic breakthrough of 1994, the triple crisis of unemployment, poverty, and inequality persists. In some respects, it has worsened.
During its more than 2 decades of rule, we've seen the ANC introduce measures to improve the prospects for upward social mobility of the black middle class through state employment and positions in the government, affirmative action or black economic empowerment, state tenders for goods and services, and so on.
Black people who get into white-owned companies through the black economic empowerment process then get into a system, one which is very reluctant to change, and two, which they don't own completely and which they don't control. So at best, what they do, or what we do, is to be advocates.
While poverty and insecurity are the daily bread of the majority, a tiny capitalist elite live with excessive wealth.
This appears not to have been enough, and the main form of wealth accumulation for those linked to the ANC has been through government corruption and looting the state's coffers.
So fraught has the environment within the organization become that if the ANC does not experience a turnaround, it will not be able to construct that national democratic society that it aspires to.
You have a state that's largely captured by economic elites who are advancing to a large extent, a pro-capitalist agenda that's about getting as much out of the economic cake for them and their connected few.
The state capture, a lot of people think that the state capture is something that they've just arisen now in Gupta. No. There's a bigger capture of the ANC by capital.
The issue is the reason we love Nelson Mandela is because he made a deal with the white elites, the power structures, the De Beers, the Oppenheimers, to remain in power, and he wouldn't touch their wealth.
That structure of the economy have not been unbundled, have not been undone. It remains intact today, and that's why we are seeing more unemployment, poverty, inequality crisis, precisely because we've not done the basics.
Asikhathali noma siyaboshwa sizimisele inkululeko asikhathali noma siyaboshwa sizimisele inkululeko unzima lomthwalo.
The president himself keep on telling the country that 95% of everything that is owned in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange is still owned by the white population that constitute only 12% of the population. On that score alone, you can become very clear that now there has not been any aggressive implementation of the Freedom Charter. Otherwise, those figures will not be saying so. Even the second decade of democracy have benefited in economic terms more white monopoly capital and not the motive forces of the revolution.
The majority of people are basically kind of living off of the crumbs of shareholders and monopoly capitalists, and a few rich black elites have accumulated in the post-94 economic dispensation.
With policies like BEE, it was sort of turned to mean that, well, black incorporation basically into the regime of accumulation, and that's not what the Freedom Charter intended. And there are a lot of people who share this particular view. What BEE has done is to entrench, actually, the link between black capitalist class and the old class that ruled before 1994.
Unless you actually address the fact that the laws of South Africa doesn't make the corporations share the wealth as the Freedom Charter demands, my fear is nothing will change.
It must be remembered that it was the mining industry, and specifically the Chamber of Mines, which pioneered the most oppressive features of apartheid South Africa.
In 1987, Cyril Ramaphosa was the General Secretary of the National Union of Mineworkers. He led the Great Mineworkers Strike of 1987. The strike was met with violent repression by the mine bosses.
Since the discovery of minerals in
our country, mining bosses have chased profit based on availability of the cheap and unskilled labor.
The relationship between the ANC and monopoly capital in particular, but also capital in general, is one of unity and struggle, or if you like, cooperation and contestation.
This test that we're going through, which incidentally I think continues to have many positive potential future outcomes, is precisely a way where liberal business is trying to find a sustainable pattern of sharing power with black workers. A pattern of sharing power that does justice to economic reality and that is fair in terms of everybody's interests.
I don't know how one shares power with people who've got shotguns in their hands, who've got tear gas canisters, and I don't know how one shares power with people who are paying the starvation wages that they pay.
Exactly 25 years later, in August 2012, Cyril Ramaphosa himself was a mine boss in British company Lonmin. He was also a leader of the ruling party and partook in the repression of the Marikana mine workers' strike that resulted in the massacre of 34 mine workers.
We're not the first country to have a wave of strikes. Let's just get that clear. Many countries, both middle-income countries, low-income countries, and your high-income countries, have been through waves of strikes. And many of those strikes in some countries have even toppled governments.
In a profit-led economy model, this wage system is an anchor for monopoly capital and the root of the exploitation of workers.
There's no such thing as a liberal bourgeois. They are all the same. They use fascist methods to destroy workers' lives.
What's significant about Ramaphosa is the Marikana moment in 2012. At the critical moment before the massacre, Ramaphosa basically chose where he stands, or on which side of the fence he stands, and it was with Lonmin, which is international capital.
For many, the Marikana massacre of 34 striking Lonmin mine workers on 16 August 2012 represents a political turning point in post-apartheid South Africa. It brutally laid bare the common interests of the ruling party and white monopoly capital, and conversely, the new dispensation being against the black working class.
If there is an issue that has preoccupied our people greatly since 1994, it has been the question of land.
Since the 17th century, indigenous black people were robbed of their land through colonial conquests. This continued well into the 20th century with wars of dispossession, replaced by laws of dispossession, such as the 1913 Land Act, which prescribed that Africans could only occupy and own land in reserve areas, which made up a mere 13% of all land in South Africa.
The land distribution and ownership remains unfulfilled.
We find ourselves that the land question is far from resolved.
The issue of land redistribution is probably the biggest failure of the ANC post-1994, the biggest failure of the democratic government.
Nowhere for me is the bankruptcy of the Freedom Charter more clearly demonstrated than on the land question.
The land should be shared amongst those who work it.
If we say the land should be shared and the people who will work the land will also own the land, I think this is just a myth.
The land belongs to all who live in it, black and white. The Africanist argument or position was that at the time, look, this cannot be right. You cannot allow the oppressed and the oppressor to be equal in terms of having equal rights when it comes to land or land ownership.
Who must pay the land in their own land? Why should we pay our land in our own land? Why should we suffer for our own land? This emanates from the land question.
Not only owning, the land that we're standing on or where we are sitting right now in this house, it meant a lot to us culturally, politically, economically, everything centered around the land question.
If you want to give a meaning to any revolution, the first issue you should address is the property question.
What seems to be happening is that it's acceleration of urbanization rather than distribution of land. And urbanization means small little pockets of land holdings with a lot of credit of buildings and then expensive buildings and so on, and then that is development. For me, that is not the solution. The children of today don't even understand how to clean a small little plot. And then when they think of food, they're thinking of small little gardens. That is food security. It's not. It's not food security. Small little gardens is not food security. Because what it does is that their food is in Spa. And then it means money. That is what when crime is up. Because now money is food. That's we're building on a crisis that when it explodes, you will be shocked. You are nursing a crisis. You are not conforming to the Freedom Charter.
It's all manner of interpretations. People have interpreted to mean that only those who want to be engaged in agricultural activities must be given land. Others will interpret it in a more radical, progressive fashion that says, actually, we can't just be talking about offering black farmers land to farm and leaving the rest of the population, which is 80–90% black, propertyless.
The government have long ago forgot about us as landless people, especially the women. The policies of land is just to ensure that the capitalist system are growing and there's no pro-poor policy.
Long live all South Africans, long live. Long live! Long live the freedom that Mandela fought for, long live. Long live!
The government have been implementing for 20 years a program of sharing the land with farm workers, namely the government's land reform program. Farm workers mainly get to share in the land through what is called equity schemes, where they get shares in the farming business.
Soos ons weet dat die meengegronde belang behoort aan die gemeenskap en ons hier die grond by die munisipaliteit, hulle bestuur dit namens die gemeenskap.
But even the way people think about land redistribution, they basically thinking about replacing a white farmer with a black farmer, so a big land baron with another big land baron who still engages in exploitation. There's no question about what social relations will prevail on those particular farms and how you can actually include communities in that scheme. It's an elite-driven project.
The way land is divided and managed and owned in South Africa is one of the key structural drivers of violence against women. It's precisely the control by mainly white male farmers of most of South Africa's agricultural land that create the power relationships that lie behind women being beaten up so much. And the same in the former Bantustan areas, where it is the way that land is managed through traditional leadership that creates the conditions for this widespread gender-based violence.
Where there's communal land, where the chiefs have the right to the land and the custodianship of the land, it's always when women go to ask for land, where's your husband? Your marital status are connected to access to land for women.
Oppression, exploitation, violence is rife in the rural areas.
This year will mark the 5th anniversary of the farm workers' strike, and there were critical lessons emerging from that particular strike about organizing, but there was also a big reminder about how little things have changed. Look at the condition of farm workers in South Africa today, and you juxtapose it to the condition of farm workers under apartheid, and you'll see that there's very little that has changed.
Ek sien geen verskil nie. Dat mense word nog steeds sleg behandel op plase. Daar's nog baie uitsettings wat plaasvind op plase.
During the time that the extension of Security of Tenure Act, there's been 2.4 million people at least evicted from farms in South Africa.
Onze mense, meeste van die tye, ken nie hulle regte nie en hulle beweeg net uit die plaas sonder om regte stappe te volg, sonder om even 'n hofbevel te kry, want hulle is nou bang vir die boer.
Employers find various ways of evading legislation.
Die mense wat amper 10 jaar gaan op die plaas bly, dis die mense wat die boere so sleg behandel. Omdat hulle weet, zodra die persoon vir 10 jaar daar bly, dan word die persoon geprotect deur die ESTA law.
The solution can't be to share between workers and capitalists, between blacks and racist farmers. It's never going to work. The solution is to do away with the share that capitalists have in the land.
In terms of land distribution, we need to answer the question of purpose. For what purpose do we want land to be redistributed and so on? Because land, you see, is an asset. It's used for either residential purposes or farming purposes. Is a factor in production.
The redistribution process has failed. The willing buyer, willing seller policy, this linking it to market prices actually resulted in government spending so much money and buying some of these farms far more than they're worth.
I maintain that we've been paying too much of a premium for land that should have been expropriated in the interests of the public.
The Freedom Charter was saying, occupy the land wherever you choose to occupy the land. It's not Malema, it's the Freedom Charter.
Land redistribution must be accompanied by other measures if we are to achieve the goal at the required pace. Expropriation without compensation within the law, within the Constitution.
Government, in the public interests, has the right to take land, to expropriate land for public use and for public interest use. And in doing so, it can then determine the price on which it expropriates that land.
Op die oomblik is die ANC as regering is die mandaat nie daar om arme mense se kwessies aan te spreek nie.
They don't even understand what they're talking about when they talk about land and food security. If they understood and actually understand the dynamics on the ground and condone the lives of those that are struggling and not pretend, because if they think they will do it with debt, that is not. It won't. We have now gone on to a level where things are even worse than ever. Is there anybody who actually sit and reflect about the land issue?
I would want to belong to a movement where we can have an open discussion about this, about what does this land shall be shared, practically what do we mean.
They should have done it a long time ago.
I think one of the things that we did miss out on is actually demanding a complete reversal of all of those gains that apartheid had for the privileged. And that would have meant the immediate return of the land that had been taken forcefully from its owners.
Ons wil nie sien dat daar tweede Zimbabwe gebeur nie, maar volgens wat dit nou gaan, dat die rykdom by 'n paar mense sit en die rykdom nie verdeel word onder die arme mense nie, sal ons in die toekoms met dieselfde geval sit wat Zimbabwe mee gesit word, as dit al manier is om grond in ons mense se hande te kry.
You have to break the power of the racist capitalist farmers. And to do that, you have to take away their property. They have wealth. That is the source of their power. Those things must be taken away.
Do you think the current ANC government is willing and able to solve the land question?
Hoe kan ek trek uit Mitsasplein uit en dan bly aan Blokkiesdorp man? Hoe kan moet ons hier uit en dan moet wat mens dan vrede te stel?
I grew up in a family where the Freedom Charter was almost of biblical proportions.
Hulle slaap lekker elke aan. As dit reën, ons skep water uit ons hokke uit man. Hy gee nie vir ons wat ons wil hê, ons moet gee nie. Hy is te gerieflik agter ons.
When I became minister, I looked at that section that dealt with housing. There shall be no slums. There shall be no fenced environment for people. There will be creches and all of those things where people live. That defines what we now call human settlements.
Ons braai mense kry niks reggie. As die African man nou gesê het, ons gaan daar gaan. As jy net 'n paar mense wat gaan nie. Hulle is daar duisende wat gaan daar. En hulle gaan toi en hulle gaan slaap heel week voor die parlement se huis. Dan kry hulle reg. Hoe kan ons braai mense dan nie daai reken nie?
There isn't a country that has provided its citizens with as many housing opportunities as this country. We have provided 4 million housing and housing opportunities for our people.
I lived in this place, Mizamo yetu, from 1991.
We have about 33,000 residents, which 80% of it is young people.
Before, we lived in the bushes of Hout Bay. When they remove us from one bush, we go around like dassies to another bush. We circle the Hout Bay bushes. That's why we were here for all those years. And in 1990, with the big fire, and when we lost 4 lives and others were critically burned, is when the people were removed from Ciprodax bush to this land. We were supplied with 4 sheets and plastic and poles to build the houses. 1993, they started to make some streets, and we thought they will build some houses, but it didn't came like that. They just built some toilets. And all those years we have been waiting for the government to build some houses. The struggle goes on.
The Freedom Charter says there shall be houses, security and comfort.
Our government says he'll build house RDP, enough RDP for the people. But today, there is nothing like that.
The question is, do people have houses, security and comfort? I think not.
When we got into government in 1994, inheriting all the red tape that we found in government, we realized that between what we want to do and what is possible is a chasm.
Since 1994, when the ANC government adopted the RDP, Reconstruction and Development Program, it committed itself to spending at least 5% of the national budget on housing. It has never done so.
When Joe Slovo started the program on housing, we had no reference point, so we had to motivate why we needed to provide free housing. This was part of the rights that we had promised in the Freedom Charter. These were part of the socio-economic rights that our people were entitled to. But the budget to deal with that was not going to be able to cover everybody that needed housing. So he started with an idea of an incremental housing. It would be probably 2 rooms or 1 room with a roof over the head. The most important thing is that what they had around them was land, their land, and they had a title deed. And the house, as the circumstances got better, they could expand on their house, they could make it better, they could make it bigger.
Do you get the smell?
Ordinary working class people, they say these houses are worse than apartheid's matchbox houses. You know, it's just a hall without partitions inside. Many of them are built with flimsy material. There are cracks, falling down, roof leaks.
Sweat equity is that which Joe Slovo and the minister after him had worked out was necessary so that people feel the ownership of the house, that they should participate in taking themselves out of their own situation. It didn't work because there wasn't a point at which we could say, now you depend on yourself, because we didn't have the opportunities for employment. There was no possibility that people would get better conditions. So housing became an impetus. We must provide more and more and more housing. Africa is one of the most rapidly urbanizing continents, and South Africa probably very close to the top of that. The pull factor is the search for jobs.
People from rural areas, they come in a hope that is where I can get a job. No job, no place to stay. So the best is to build this little mkuku for me.
And we cannot match the influx into the urban areas. And unfortunately for us, the backlog grows faster than we are able to build. When you see the site of these shacks and the numbers of these shacks, you do come to the conclusion that we are in crisis.
More than 5 million people live in informal settlements, if we include backyard shacks and also standalone shacks.
We recognize that we have a great deal of inherited poverty, but we also have able-bodied young people who can get themselves out of poverty.
We live in a community where there's shortage of space. I think it's important that young people are also awarded the opportunity to qualify for houses, especially young people who are post-matric, as well as people who've been through tertiary education. Simply because our background, it actually disables a lot of young people an opportunity to actually obtain a house.
That 20-year-old, he's been in that shape from the birth up to 20 years. Now, he said, now it's too much, I cannot live in that. Then he started to build another mkuku.
I am dealing with 100-year-old people who don't have houses. Just culturally, it is unheard of that I would prioritize you over somebody who is that old.
The ANC has tended to allow business methods and logic to intrude into housing. So you find that cement factories, brick factories, even the people who actually build the houses, the companies, they're all doing it for profit.
We announced that we, as government, have something like 55 mega catalytic projects. We opened this matter up to the private sector to say the private sector is free to come and join us.
If you put out tenders, you spend on the tendering process, someone, wins the tender, and then they cut corners, let alone the corruption. So a lot of money meant for houses ends up in private pockets in various ways at every point of the chain, the supply chain and the building chain.
The other avenue that we are now focusing on is social housing. Social housing in layman terms is rental housing. People who cannot afford to buy a house or get a mortgage will be able to be subsidized by the state by getting into social housing, rented accommodation, which is highly subsidized by the state.
The mass low-cost RDP and other subsidized housing programs have had the unintended consequence of entrenching apartheid spatial patterns by building working-class housing in peripheral locations far from work and other resources. And this has served simply to reproduce working-class marginalization and black poverty.
Since 1994, the private sector in the bigger municipalities has constructed 1,625,000 residential buildings financed by the big commercial banks.
The only way to build a house is to go to the bank, but you have to qualify. So in a way, the provision of housing and the major decisions are being outsourced to the banks, to the money lenders. And this is a problem.
With the bond houses, when a person get a job and decided to make a loan, but after some times you get retrenched. So the bank will want his money and then you're stuck. Because we are dealing with capitalists in this country, the money first, profit first, and the people come after. So the poor person, man or woman, he'll be evicted or she'll be evicted in that house. They'll send the red ants, they'll send the police, and yet we know if they evict you, they should give you a space or a place to stay, as our Freedom Charter says.
I used to stay in RNS for 14 years now. Today I'm homeless. I've got nothing to eat. I'm at the street and I'm going to sleep here with a baby. The baby doesn't even wearing anything. I don't know what to do.
The law that we are dealing with, which is the protection of illegal eviction, is one that says that you may not evict anybody without first making sure that there is a house provided.
Over the last 20 years, those at the bottom have been systematically impoverished. More than 2 million farm workers have been evicted during this period.
Law enforcement was evict us, shooting us with rubber bullets, with tear gas. We have families, we have kids.
My man was on the plaza for certain to Madakumahan.
And I beat you and to Mitahan.
I tell you, Bangers for the work 20 years. Die boer het gesê ons moet die huis leegmaak, die boer wil die huis vir die bediende gee wat by hom in die kombuis werk. Toe sê ek vir die boer, maar ek gaan nie uit nie. Toe sê die prokureur, okay, as ons nie wil uitgaan nie, dan moet ons maar hof toe gaan. Ons is van 2000 af 2001, dus ons van die plaas af afgezet. Hy had nog nie die oom uitgebetaal nie, nog nie oom sy geld gegee nie.
Kijk, die mans wat die werken, die vrouwens teken voor de huis. Als hij vrouw niet meer kan werken, en dan zag die boer weg zo worden.
Toen zei hij van mij, alles van mij zei, alles van mij brief schrijven, waar ik met mijn goederen kon krijgen daar. En toen leek ik nog in het hospitaal ook.
En ik heb voor 18 jaar gehad.
En tot nu toe, ik single.
We've been evicted without letting us know. We don't know why we have been evicted.
There was an oversight when we created the law, but unfortunately the courts have tended to be on the side of the landlord.
Since the 1990s, more people have been evicted than under the Group Areas Act.
Van in die 94 het daar nog niet iets vredelijk of interessant gebeuren met plaatswerkers.
Hier is 'n beter lewe vir ons. En ons het nou al hoeveel keer gestem, niks kom reg nie.
20 years past democracy. It is still the same status quo. What is the land movement about?
What we need to do is restructure how we think about the provision of housing for our people.
The housing should be included as part of integration and transformation because we are just a main road that divides us from the haves and have-nots.
The national sound for South Africa should be a thunder of bulldozers and diggers. If you go past the townships, there should be forests of tower cranes, thundering big trucks bringing in bricks, concrete, cement. Dignity being brought to people. And there are men by the side of the road.
When we say the people shall govern, it means that rather than having a top-down approach, we should have this participatory process, because that's the lesson really of the Congress of the People when they were asked what kind of South Africa would they want to live in. Their answers is what gave birth to the Freedom Charter.
The Freedom Charter has been most influential in the new South Africa's democratic rights, as contained in the country's constitution and Bill of Rights. However, the reality of South Africa's political economy has undermined these rights for the majority.
South Africa is a different country. The freedom for people of colour compared to what it was before is just remarkable. And of course in Parliament there's no comparison between the profile of Parliament today with what it was under Apartheid. So those are big changes that have happened, and it would be foolish to ignore them or to downplay them.
In one sense, people are government. We are now supposedly a democracy. We get to vote every now and then.
We only visit our people once in 5 years when we are going for elections.
Once they are voted into power, they tend to shift focus or forget about the core promises.
At the same time, there are serious concerns about where we're going. And those concerns relate very much to the functioning of government.
Before the elections, it is presented that it is you are choosing the leaders to represent your needs. But once they are there, they forget about the people.
The first phase of our national democratic revolution, which had promised so much, is now under threat of erosion and reversal.
Our degrees cost more than the shacks we live in. As I'm standing here, my first degree cost 300,000. My mother does not even own a home which cost 300,000. Please, students, unite! Workers, unite! Phansi ngomqondo gqwirha phansi! Phansi amakapitali phansi!
If you look on the right to protest, we've seen how a number of times those who are in power respond to protest.
Marikana and the farm worker rebellion of 2012 were really important moments and to a large extent major points of departure in the contract between state and citizens.
Things are slipping. They are. If you go to Parliament, you will see that many members of Parliament don't know the Freedom Charter.
What was most disturbing about Marikana was to see the collusion of some of South Africa's ruling elites and the kind of clear statement of a state that will defend corporate interests, even to the point of actually murdering people.
No government that justly claims authority should ever turn its guns on its own people.
We thought that those were the things that, the apartheid government did because they were bad and horrible. But for, a democratic government to have murdered workers demanding a living wage instead of playing some role that facilitated and advanced, workers' demands.
We are not part of a country that kills our people. We are not part of a country where the land and the minerals belong to white people. We are not part of that arrangement. We reject South Africa.
Andrew Stadani was shot and killed for protesting for water. Access to water is a basic need. People need water, so why would you want to kill someone for that?
Once that happens, it means that there is a major deviation from the tenets of the Freedom Charter, because a government that is inspired by the Freedom Charter should really lend a sympathetic ear to those demands.
We are in a tricky situation where things could deteriorate and could deteriorate quickly.
Much, but not all of this popular decline is related to the almost daily revelation of, I must say, embarrassing scandals involving highly placed ANC politicians in government, and particularly those who have been entangled with the notorious Gupta Empire.
All shall be equal before the law. That statement is not true.
All shall be equal in terms of the law. That's still a pipe dream.
Currently, it's about the money. Can you afford to pay legal services?
When it comes to human rights, yes, on the document, the Constitution, they are stated nicely there, but practically, and when it comes to implementation, those very same human rights favor the very same people that oppressed other people.
If you look in terms of the rural communities, they don't have any support when it comes to accessing legal advice. I'm not even talking about having to take the case to court.
All the xenophobia going on is a symptom of the ANC and the government have not promoted good values according to the Charter and the Constitution adequately. The media, where would we be without the media if we did not have a press in South Africa? My God, we'd be a hell of a lot worse. There's no doubt in my mind. We wouldn't know about Marikana, we wouldn't know about all sorts of things. Unfortunately, authority seems to be trying to clamp down.
The issue of access to information, media freedom. I personally believe that our democracy is under threat.
Many are frustrated with the new democratic dispensation and are openly rebelling against it.
On paper, when you read the Constitution and the Freedom Charter and you hear about equal rights on paper, some of these things are there. But in terms of reality, people's lives changing, I don't think that's the case.
The Freedom Charter, if we view it ideologically, it now belongs to the past.
We need to distinguish between the goals or destinations it set for South Africa, 1955, and the language that it used in 1955. I would have to observe that we live in a different world.
I would say we need a Freedom Charter, of the present era.
It's a document which provoked debate within the trade union movement in the 1980s. There were those who saw it not as a socialist document. They saw it as some social democratic document with very limited demands.
I don't think the Freedom Charter has anything to contribute to solving the key problems of South Africa and specifically of the working class.
There are streets to be tarred, there are homes to be built, there are lavatories to be erected, there are sewers to be dug, pipes to be laid for running water, electricity to be brought, there are schools to be built, hospitals, clinics.
The very same people who wrote that Freedom Charter, they then fulfill their promises. I think they were lying to the people.
Based on what the ANC has achieved, in fact not achieved in the past few years that the ANC has been in power, I do not have faith that they will realize the promises of the Freedom Charter.
They just wanted people to vote for them, to be in that position, so that they can look down to those people. As now they are up there and people are down, living in a dirty, wet tin house, no electricity, no water.
For a lot of people, they continue to feel like South Africa is not theirs because they just are completely excluded from day-to-day activities of the country in terms of unemployment, in terms of poverty.
They lied to the people.
Thank you.
The ruling ANC's failure to fulfill all the promises of the Freedom Charter has led to splits to the left of the organization, with the Economic Freedom Fighters, EFF, formed in July 2013.
It's clear we're going back to 1996 policies which have not worked for our country. And you know very well that the whole world is saying you cannot grow the economy with foreign direct investment only. You have to stimulate local investment that is led by the state. But we don't see that coming from you.
In that same year, South Africa's biggest trade union, NUMSA, decided to break from the alliance with the ANC and organize for a new socialist party.
Nobody wanna see us together. Nobody wanna see us together. Bali mami no 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 no. Nobody wanna see us together. Bali wanna see us together.
Something serious has to happen in order to bring us back on track.
Now is the time to stand up and continue with the road towards economic freedom.
The EFF, the left, NUMSA, I think generally these guys are asking all of the right questions.
I will say Nelson took us to a particular extent and then left it there for us to take it over.
They are a call to clarity, a call almost to soberness for an elite that in many ways has grown out of touch with the country that it seeks to lead.
Are we betraying the struggles of today, or are we going to be the new heroes of a new struggle for the total emancipation of South African people?
We must, as a movement, focus afresh on the task of building a non-racial country guided by the injunction of the Freedom Charter that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white.
We slave and sweat, but we still remain poor. We build the houses, we build the flats, we build the dwellings, but thousands of us still remain homeless to this day. We even grow the food and harvest the crops and serve our big fat masters, yet our children and ourselves go hungry every day. In short, comrades, we produce the wealth of this country and create the profits upon which more and more capital is accumulated. Indeed, without us, the racist motto of exploitation can grind to a halt.
The question we should be asking is, what are we going to do to implement the Charter? What are we going to do to enforce socialism in our society? Those are the questions, not the adoption of the Charter. It's the implementation. It's to bring the Charter to life. What we must be talking about, Comrade Chair, is action.
What we should be doing is to mobilizing a revolutionary movement from the ground up.
And nothing short of a revolution is going to shift the trajectory we are in.
The second revolution has to take place, and God, I hope that it will be as peaceful as the first phase. We cannot continue like this.
As to whether the ANC is still capable of realizing and implementing the Freedom Charter, I think that boat has sailed already. It's time to think about new ways of organizing, and perhaps the old ways don't work anymore.